The Missing Coins by John Escott. Penguin Readers, Level 1. Text copyright Pearson Education Limited, 2000. Recording copyright Pearson Education Limited, 2008. Not to be publicly performed, resold, hired, copied or re-recorded without written permission from the publishers.
Bath is a very old city in England. It has a beautiful abbey. A lot of people visit the city every year. And in the summer, there are always a lot of tourists in the streets. Pete and Carla are students in Bath. They like the city. Pete likes looking at the beautiful old buildings. Carla likes walking in the little streets. She often finds pretty little shops there and goes into them. Or she sits with Pete in a cafe and watches the tourists. It's a Saturday in summer and a hot afternoon. There are a lot of tourists in the city today. People from many countries are going into the abbey. Let's find a quiet street, away from the tourists, Carla says. Okay, Pete says. He likes being with Carla. They walk away from the abbey. After some time, they are in a little street behind the abbey. This is pretty, Carla says. There are only 2 or 3 tourists in this street. The shops have small windows. Some houses have pretty little gardens. It's quiet here, but Pete and Carla can hear music. Look, Pete says. That man is playing a flute. Let's go and listen. They walk across the street and watch the man. 4 or 5 people are listening. Why is he playing here? Carla asks. There aren't many tourists in this street. No, Pete says, and there are only 3 or 4 coins in his hat. Pete and Carla listen to the flute player. The tune is Greensleeves. I know that tune, Carla says. And she puts a coin in the man's hat. Pete takes her hand. Let's go, Carla, he says to her. Let's see the shops in the next street. Okay, Carla says. They walk away. The flute player watches them, but his tune, Greensleeves, doesn't stop. He isn't a very good flute player, Pete says, but it's a good tune. There were only 4 coins in his hat, Carla says. That's because he isn't very good, Pete says. And he's playing in the wrong street. The tourists are near the abbey. They walk to the next street. They find a little shop there. There are some old coins and stamps in the shop window. They come from many countries. Let's go in here, Carla says. It's an interesting little shop. Okay, Pete says. The shop is small. Pete and Carla go in, and an old man watches them. He is the shopkeeper. Good afternoon, he says. Good afternoon, Carla says. Hi, Pete says. What can I do for you? The shopkeeper says. Can we look at the stamps? Pete asks. The shopkeeper looks at them. Okay, he says. Do you collect stamps? No, but I'm going to start collecting them, Pete says. They're interesting. Yes, they are, the shopkeeper says. Pete looks at some stamps from Canada and some stamps from South America. These are beautiful stamps, he says. The shopkeeper stands near Pete and watches him. He isn't happy, Carla thinks. Why? We aren't going to steal his stamps. She looks at some coins. Are these coins very old? Carla asks the old man. They're 300 years old, says the shopkeeper. They're very valuable. Every coin in my shop is valuable. A girl is working in the shop too. She looks at Carla. Carla smiles, but the girl doesn't smile at her. She isn't very friendly, Carla thinks. Suddenly, they hear a telephone in the room behind the shop. The shopkeeper doesn't answer it for a minute. Then he looks at the girl and she looks at him. They don't speak, but Carla understands. The shopkeeper doesn't speak, but he is saying to the girl, "Watch these students." "Excuse me," he says to Carla and Pete, and he goes into the back room. Pete is looking at the stamps. "Come and see these, Carla," he says. "They're from South America. I want to start collecting them." But Carla doesn't like the people in this shop. They aren't very friendly, and she wants to look at the city. "They're very expensive," she says. "Let's go, Pete." The girl watches them, and then she smiles. She's happy because we're going, Carla thinks. But why? Pete and Carla go back into the big streets with the tourists. Carla is happy now because they are not in the shop. But the sun is hot, and Pete wants a drink. "Let's go to a cafe near the Abbey," he says. He wanted the stamps from South America, but he doesn't say this. There are tables outside the cafe. Pete and Carla sit down. There are a lot of people in the cafe. "Can we go into the Abbey next?" Carla asks. He wants the stamps from South America, she thinks, but they're very expensive. "I want a drink first," Pete says. "Okay," Carla says, and she smiles at him. Pete smiles at her too. After a minute or two, they hear, "Hey, there you are!" Pete and Carla look up. It's the old man from the shop. "What does he want?" Pete says. "I don't know," Carla says, "but he's angry." "What's wrong?"